She arrived equipped with a single sheet of paper, one inquiry and one mission: reveal the truth. What unfolded after that? Jimmy Kimmel lost his composure before a massive audience, and the online world witnessed everything. Karoline Leavitt wasn't inexperienced. She understood that entering a late-night talk show, particularly this one, was akin to stepping into someone else's domain. Yet she embraced the opportunity. The email from the producers presented it as an occasion to discuss the rising influence of young voters, and to her that justified making the appearance. However, something in the phrasing seemed overly refined, a bit too orchestrated. She touched down in Los Angeles in the late afternoon. A car greeted her at the airport and whisked her directly to the studio near Hollywood Boulevard. The driver stayed mostly silent, just played a hand-picked Spotify playlist that curiously included a lot of sarcasm-infused comedy tracks. Karoline gazed out the window, pondering how much of the evening had already been predetermined before she even agreed to appear. Backstage, the atmosphere felt strange. The hospitality was decent: bottled water, fruit platter, smiling interns, but the vibe was peculiar. People grinned at her, but it lacked warmth. It resembled the kind of grin someone offers when they believe they've already predicted the outcome. One producer, a woman named Lacey, entered with a clipboard and forced enthusiasm. "Karoline, thanks so much for joining us. Jimmy's thrilled to chat with you. Just a heads up, we might toss in a few gentle jabs, but nothing too extreme." Karoline smiled. "I can handle humor." Lacey smirked as if doubting that. Before departing, she mentioned, "Oh, and no phones on stage. Okay, standard procedure." That detail struck her differently. No phones. Karoline had been on enough programs to know that wasn't entirely typical, but she nodded regardless and tucked her phone into her bag. Her makeup was applied swiftly, expertly, but with minimal chit-chat. No casual banter. No, "What brings you to LA?" Just a brush, some powder, and quiet. The green room TV displayed muted snippets of past monologues from the show. She observed Jimmy ridicule various politicians, mostly conservatives. She already sensed what this was, but she also knew why she was there. A few minutes later, a young assistant with a headset tapped and signaled her forward. "You're on in 5. She inhaled, straightened her blazer, adjusted her mic. As she approached the stage entrance, she could hear the audience chuckling from something Jimmy had just said. Likely another dig aimed at her. But she didn't waver as she stood behind the curtain. She glimpsed Jimmy on the monitor. He was at ease, relaxed, leaning toward the crowd with that signature smirk. And now he announced, "Please welcome Karoline Leavitt, a former White House staffer, the youngest GOP congressional candidate ever, and someone who just might explain what the youth are thinking these days." Polite applause, a few chuckles. She stepped out, smile firm, shoulders squared. Jimmy rose to greet her, extended a handshake, and as they settled in, he faced the audience. "Karoline, thanks for coming. We had to push our flat earth debate to squeeze you in, so no pressure." Laughter. Karoline smiled, unfazed. "Thanks for inviting me. I hear flat earthers get a warmer welcome in Hollywood anyway." That drew a mixed response, some laughs, a few uneasy coughs. She wasn't there to charm the crowd. She was there to deliver the truth. And even if no one else in that studio anticipated what was coming, she did. But tension was simmering beneath the surface, and the next 5 minutes were poised to alter everything. The overhead lights blazed hotter than they appeared on screen. Karoline could feel them searing her skin, but her demeanor remained composed. Her posture tilted just slightly forward in her seat, not overly keen, not overly guarded. Jimmy, by contrast, looked like he'd just set a personal record at the gym. Tie loosened, legs crossed, one arm draped over the back of his chair as if he owned the entire space. "So, Karoline," he started, casually flipping through his blue note cards, "you've got plenty of views for someone who was still in high school when I won my first Emmy." That earned a chuckle from the crowd. It was a classic move, jab at age. Establish yourself as the veteran presence, and win the audience early. Karoline didn't flinch. Well, Jimmy, I was indeed in high school when many folks made choices that harmed my generation. I suppose that gave me ample drive to catch up quickly. The audience hesitated, unsure if laughter was appropriate. Then a lone person clapped just once. A moment later, the show pressed on. Jimmy laughed, shaking his head as if humoring her, but his eyes narrowed faintly. He leaned in. Seriously though, people are curious. What drives someone your age to enter politics? Most folks your age are busy shooting TikToks and sipping oat milk. Another cheap laugh, a bit louder this time. Karoline smiled, but her voice sharpened. Because I don't want the people deciding my future to be the same ones mocking it on late-night TV. The silence that followed carried weight. The quick didn't hit as Jimmy intended. He glanced at the control booth, perhaps awaiting a signal to pivot. He shuffled his cards, searching for a safer topic. Okay, fair. But surely you don't think these shows actually sway anything, right? We're just having fun here. Karoline tilted her head slightly. You don't think comedy influences opinion? Jimmy shrugged. I think comedy gets laughs. That's my gig. She leaned closer. Then why does so much of your content align with one political party's narrative? Why does your show only target one side? The audience laughed again, but it was sharper this time, more uncertain. Jimmy's mouth parted, but before he could respond, Karoline pressed on. I brought something. She reached under her seat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. It was pristine, crisp, highlighted in yellow across several lines. Last October, she said, you aired a bit about anti-science Republicans and quoted a phrase nearly verbatim from a strategic email sent by a media coordination group based in DC, funded by a PAC. Jimmy straightened, no longer grinning. Karoline held the paper between them. I've got the memo. I can recite it. Jimmy's tone dropped. You're claiming I took a script from a political outfit. I'm saying someone on your team might have, and if you didn't know, you ought to have. The room stopped laughing. Jimmy tried to brush it off, his pitch a tad higher than usual. Oh boy, I guess the kid's got her conspiracy board with the red yarn backstage, huh? A few titters, but the strain was palpable. Karoline didn't budge. No yarn, just proof. And with that, she set the paper on the desk between them. The camera swung to Jimmy, but the usual gleam was absent. His lips twitched into a half smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. You really think this is the venue for that? He asked, a bit softer now. Karoline's reply was steady. Why not? You asked me here to discuss political awareness. I'm aware, and now your viewers are too. But if Jimmy thought that was the end, he was about to learn how fast the tide could shift. Jimmy didn't touch the paper. He eyed it like it might bite, a prop from an unintended script. The cameras kept rolling, and the room went from lively and cheerful to taut and charged. You could almost hear the crew holding their breath behind the lenses. Karoline eased back in her chair. Not smug, just solid. This wasn't theater. It was groundwork. Jimmy grabbed his untouched water mug. His hand shook just enough to be seen, and in that small motion, something fractured. So, what exactly are you accusing me of? He asked, trying to lighten it, but falling short. That I'm part of some deep state comedy syndicate. She shook her head. Not a syndicate, just a web of media folks who act independent while reading from the same political script. She turned to the audience, not the camera. Not Jimmy, but the real people in those seats under the glaring lights. Most of you came here tonight to laugh, right? But how many knew that Jimmy's October bid on anti-science hysteria was pitched by a media consultant hired by the Red River Initiative? That's a PAC backed by 3 donors who just last year also bankrolled the exact ad campaigns your show claimed to mock. No one spoke. That name, Red River Initiative, wasn't widely known, but Karoline wasn't guessing. Her folder held dates, names, email headers, and figures. Jimmy's jaw shifted slightly, like he was mulling words he hadn't chosen yet. He glanced at the control booth again. Can we? He muttered, clearly off script, but they didn't cut. Not yet. Karoline didn't wait for approval. I'm not saying you penned it, she went on, turning back to Jimmy. I'm saying someone in your building did. Someone got the wording, got the angle, and handed it over. And then it landed in your monologue, dressed as humor. Jimmy fired back. Come on, you think I write every gag? No, she said, but you take the credit. The audience murmured. A few shifted in their seats. Even in Hollywood, even on a comedy stage, something here was resonating. Jimmy tried again, leaning in, now visibly shaken. Karoline, with all due respect, this sounds like the sort of thing people toss out for attention. I don't take orders from DC strategists. I don't take orders, period. She paused. Then why are you so upset right now? That hit deep. The question didn't need a reply. It was the reply. Jimmy's jaw clenched. Because you're on my show, accusing me of being a pawn. No. Karoline clarified. I'm suggesting the puppet masters might be nearer than you realize. The crowd didn't know how to react. They'd come for laughs, not tension. But the longer this stretched, the more obvious it became this wasn't planned. Not by the network, not by Karoline, and certainly not by Kimmel. And that's when it snapped. Jimmy slammed his hand on the desk, not hard enough to shatter anything, but enough to hush the room. That's it, he said, we're finished. He looked offstage and drew a finger across his throat, end the segment. But Karoline, sitting still, posed one final question. If you truly had nothing to conceal, why not let me wrap up? The lights dimmed a bit as the crew prepped for commercial, but it was too late. A few audience members had already whipped out their phones. No one cared about the no recording rule now. The unfiltered footage was going live. And by morning, everyone would have seen exactly how it unfolded. But what spread next wasn't just a video, it was a dialogue. And it wasn't one Jimmy Kimmel could steer. By the time they returned from break, Jimmy's expression was rigid. No more easy quips, no more crowd-pleasing chatter, just a stiff half-smile and strained poise. Karoline remained seated, still composed, still clutching that folded paper with the highlighted lines. The studio had lost its spark. It was silent between laughs now, and the applause signs might as well have been unseen. Jimmy forced a laugh as the camera swung back. Well, that escalated, he said, eyeing the crowd. It was the kind of line meant to reset the tone. But no one laughed, not genuinely. A few claps, uncertain. The audience wasn't with him anymore. They weren't against him either. They were just observing. He turned to Karoline. So, are we doing reporting now? Or are you still playing politician? Karoline met his gaze with the same steadiness she'd arrived with. Neither, she said. Just trying to speak the truth. I thought that used to matter. Jimmy leaned in. You come here, hurl a bunch of claims, drop names of groups no one knows, and expect people to just buy it. I expect people to think, she said, and I'd expect you, of all people, not to freak out when someone brings facts to the table. He laughed, but it rang hollow. Facts. You think printing some internet blog post makes you an authority? Karoline tapped the paper on his desk. This didn't come from a blog. It came from a leaked email chain. Your team was CC'd. That was it. Jimmy stood up. Actually stood. The chair scraped as it slid back. I don't have to sit here and be accused of being a mouthpiece for the GOP's wild fantasies. He snapped, his voice no longer TV polished. I bring you here for a civil chat, and instead I get a Gen Z Tucker Carlson who thinks shouting equals arguing. I haven't raised my voice once, Karoline said without budging. That's all you. Some crew members shifted uneasily. A stage manager took a cautious step forward but paused. It wasn't clear if this was still a segment or a collapse. Jimmy looked ready to storm off, but that would mean letting Karoline have the final say. And that wasn't an option. He pointed at her, jabbing the air. You're not here to help anyone think. You're here to push an agenda. You came on this show to grab headlines, not talk. She nodded calmly. That's one perspective. Another is I came for a real discussion, and you weren't prepared. The audience sat stunned. It didn't feel like TV anymore. It felt like a camera had stumbled into something it wasn't meant to capture, a glimpse behind the scenes no one expected. But now, no one could look away. Then Jimmy said it. "I'm not here to babysit some intern with a chip on her shoulder." It was low, personal, frantic. Karoline didn't reply immediately. She looked down, gave a fake laugh, then met his eyes again. "That right there," she said. "That's the issue. You think if someone's younger than you, they must be mistaken. But the reality is, you're not afraid of me. You're afraid people might trust me." A ripple ran through the room. Jimmy sat back down, eyes locked on the desk, tapping his fingers. His producers didn't signal anything. The director didn't cut. It was just dead air for a few beats, something unheard of in live TV. Then Karoline rose. "I think we're done here," she said. "I've said what I came to say." She turned, walked off the stage, and past the curtain. No handler, no security, just her and the audience, silent now, watched her leave. But while Jimmy sat dazed in his own studio, a different narrative was already igniting online, and this time, he wasn't steering it.